2023 is finally done. Christmas just passed and the new year is right around the corner. Barring any last-second surprises, one of the biggest years in gaming in the last 2 decades has concluded. This year was absolutely crammed with heavy hitters from beginning to end. We had Game of the Year worthy stuff coming out since January, and it never let up. In fact, we got bombarded with more greatness as the year went on. It was absolutely nuts. Sadly, not everything was sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops. 2023 might have been amazing when it came to the actual games, but it was one of the worst years in recent memory when it came to the industry itself. Layoffs and studio closures were painfully abundant, and it seemed like for every big game that came out, it was soon followed up by news of hundreds of people getting let go somewhere. Just in the last couple months, Bungie had a small implosion that caused 8% of its workforce to lose their jobs, and get a metric ton of benefits cut. And the unending consequences of Embracer Group's utter stupidity, financial recklessness, and just plain laughable short-sightedness continue to haunt their numerous studios with the looming threat of sudden firings and closures. Plus, Insomniac Games was just victim of a ransomware attack that leaked the private information of their employees. As we enjoy the games we love, it's important to remember how fragile so many jobs in this industry are. Video games make more money than any other form of entertainment on Earth, and you would think that with that revenue, people's jobs would be more secure. But you'd be wrong. Even the most important individuals who have given literal decades of their life to one specific company and still have gas in the tank can be unceremoniously tossed aside the instant that company hits a speed bump in their financials. And speaking of financials, games themselves have become absurdly expensive to make, costing upwards of $300 million to produce over about 5 years, but with no standout improvements to show for it compared to other games in the same genre that have a budget of a third of the size or less, including their own predecessors. It's sad to say, but the AAA space is in a tough spot right now, and its future is looking very uncertain. Now, I don't mean to start off the video with such a depressing introduction. It's just important to keep these things in mind, especially now, with all the volatility going on within some of the companies we know the most about. But let's not get too down on ourselves. There are still studios out there working their asses off to deliver some incredibly promising titles currently slated for 2024. There's talented folks spread across the world pouring their heart and soul into what may be some of the best experiences of recent years. I'm looking forward to quite a few specific ones, and this first quarter of the upcoming year is especially brutal. So without wasting any more time, let's get into my most anticipated games of 2024. And we're gonna go by release date, assuming they currently have one. If a game does not have a release date, then I'm just gonna save them for a chapter that'll come up later in the video. Oh, and this list isn't going to be exhaustive. It's only going to contain games I'm aware of and consider high priority, so to speak. Just because a game is not mentioned in this video doesn't mean I won't play it. So, January is going to kick us off with Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, and Tekken 8 coming out on the same fucking day. Man, first month of the year and it's already a doozy. This is even worse than Dead Space Remake and Hi-Fi Rush coming out 2 days apart back in January of this year. Now, considering how big of a fan I am of Like a Dragon, I'll be giving priority to Infinite Wealth if I'm in the position to pick one or the other. But I do intend to play Tekken 8 whenever I can. I gotta get some time in with my characters, Dragunov and Jin. I also enjoy Lily and Fang, though I don't know if I would consider them my characters. Infinite Wealth though, man, it looks like it's gonna be the biggest and best Like a Dragon game so far, which is saying a lot because the last game, 7, was pretty damn big. This time around, we're going to have a full-blown Animal Crossing-style minigame where Ichiban is in control of a resort that he'll be able to customize with his own shops and buildings after gathering resources on foot. It might be the most comprehensive minigame in this series to date, which, again, is saying a lot because robust minigames have always been a staple here. Ryuga Gotoku's studio somehow manages to impress me more and more as time goes on. It's crazy how good of a well-oiled machine they are. You'd think a series that releases almost annually would be hitting some bigger barriers more often, but that's just not the case with this team. Moving into February, things stay pretty damn crazy. The first day of the month belongs to Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, the long-awaited action RPG by Cygames, which was announced way back in 2016. Platinum Games was involved early on in the game's development, presumably to help Cygames make a fun, fulfilling combat system. And after such a lengthy wait, it looks just about as good as I reasonably hoped. The very following day, however, is another big one. February 2nd is going to belong to Persona 3 Reload, the remake of the third entry in the Persona series. Unfortunately, I'm most likely not going to be getting either Grand Blue Fantasy Relink or Persona 3 Reload on launch, simply because I will absolutely be too busy with Infinite Wealth. I don't even need to stop and think about it, it's just going to keep me busy for at least 2 weeks, and that doesn't include the time it'll take to make a review of it. I want to play both of these games, but Infinite Wealth will take priority here. But speaking of priority, the next game I will absolutely be playing after Infinite Wealth is the sequel to the game that made me start this channel, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If you've been watching my content for a while, then you don't need me to go into how excited I am for it, because I could go on for quite some time. I'll just say that it looks to be even bigger and better than I pictured it being after I finished Remake for the first time back in 2020. It is, by far, my number one most anticipated game of 2024, and it's coming out in February. If it's as good as I hope, and I'm not afraid to criticize it, I had some complaints about Remake too, then the remainder of the year will be a fight for second place. Fingers crossed. Now we move into March, which does have a few games I'm keeping my eye on, but I am absolutely going to be preoccupied with Rebirth for a minimum of 2 weeks as well. However, just like with January, there is one specific day that's going to take all my attention, and thankfully it's in the second half of the month, and it's the 22nd. It's the day Dragon's Dogma 2 and Rise of the Ronin launch, a sequel to Capcom's underrated RPG and a brand new open-world action-adventure game from Team Ninja, both on the same day. What a fucking punch in the face. I honestly can't tell which one I'm more interested in. Probably Dragon's Dogma, since I think it has greater potential to hit, but Rise of the Ronin seems more than capable of surprising me. I've come to the conclusion that I simply can't pick between one or the other, so I'm just going to get both and hope to God I finish them in a timely manner. Now, from this point forward, release dates are sparse. Most games after March simply have an intended release month, and that's it. The only 2 other games I'm interested in that have a date are still pretty far off, and they are Black Myth Wukong in August and Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, which is in September. They both look great for different reasons, and I hope they stay at those dates, but you know how things are. Delays happen. But now, let's officially move on to unscheduled games I'm anticipating. These games don't have dates at all. Some have windows, such as quarters or seasons, and some don't even have that. Others might even get delayed out of 2024 entirely. It's unfortunate, but it happens. So, since we can't go by dates for this section, we'll just go alphabetically. Let's start with Avowed, the fantasy RPG by Obsidian. It takes place in the Pillars of Eternity universe, so there's gonna be quite a genre jump going on here. There's not a ton of stuff shown off about this game as of now, so most of my anticipation is from the simple fact that it's a big budget Obsidian game. Next is the Western release of Earth Defense Force 6. It's time yet again to protect our mother planet from giant insects, frogs, giant lizards, and UFOs. The Earth Defense Force series is the epitome of dumb fun. These games are ugly and run like shit, but man are they entertaining. If you and a few friends just want the most turn your brain off and shoot shit type of co-op game, you pick EDF. I've been pretty heavy into the series since the release of 4, and I'm not slowing down. I even enjoyed World Brothers with its voxel art style. In fact, that's our next game, Earth Defense Force World Brothers 2, and everything I said about EDF 6 applies here as well. Next is Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, the next expansion for the long-running MMO, which actually just hit its 10th year anniversary since the launch of A Realm Reborn. Dawntrail is aiming for a summer release and will be the expansion that truly kicks off the new saga following the conclusion of the last expansion, Endwalker. It'll take players to a whole new section of the game's world, as well as introduce 2 new jobs for players to assume. When it comes to MSQ-related content specifically, I've been a pretty satisfied player since 2019 when I hopped into the game. And while I'm sure that reeling back a bit to start a new saga will be jarring to some people, I am more than willing to give it time to flesh itself out. Next is Greedfall 2: The Dying World. You might be surprised to see this title here, and honestly, I don't blame you. I was quite surprised myself at how much I enjoyed the first game. Though far from perfect, Greedfall ended up being a very enthralling RPG for me. I greatly respected its deep dive into the world's politics, religions, and commerce, and I enjoyed spending time with my companions, who were a great cast of diverse characters. Very little is known about Greedfall 2 at the moment, but I definitely have my eye on it. I'm kinda wary of the premise of the story, since it takes place a mere 3 years before the start of the first game, but we'll see how Spiders pulls it off. Next up is yet another appearance by Atlus in this video with Metaphor ReFantazio, a super stylish RPG that, let's be honest, looks like it was probably going to be given a Persona title until they settled on what they have now. The best way to describe this game is to just say it looks really fucking cool in every respect, from gameplay to UI to music. I'm not an Atlus obsessive or anything, but if Metaphor really hits for me, I could see it being a surprise contender for my top 3 of the year. And speaking of RPGs, we have an action one, and another appearance by Square in this video, with Visions of Mana, which is the first new installment of the mainline Mana franchise since 2006's Dawn of Mana for the PlayStation 2. When people think of Square's big RPG franchises, they think of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Kingdom Hearts. But I think Mana deserves at least a mention among them, because this series has been going on for a long time now and has stayed pretty consistent the entire time. The games aren't always mind-blowing or perfect, but I find them reliably entertaining. And before I finish this video, I'm going to give a quick shout out to some small indie projects sitting in my Steam wishlist, slated for a 2024 release. Either a full one or beginning early access. We have Enshrouded, which is a fantasy base-building survival game, coming to us by the creators of Portal Knights, so they have prior experience with games like this. Then we have Manor Lords, a medieval city builder and strategy game. Next is Celico, yet another retro-inspired first-person shooter, which is apparently running on GZ Doom. Next is Blacksmith Master, a sim game where you take the role of, well, a blacksmith, and make weapons and armor while expanding your workshop. The game is made by Untitled Studio, who previously made Tavern Master, so they are re-entering familiar territory, which is always reassuring. And finally, we have Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, a spin-off that takes after the insanely popular and wildly successful Vampire Survivors, which is a roguelike subgenre that I've been highly enjoying throughout 2023, and I'm always eager to see cool spins on the experience. This more or less does it for my most anticipated of 2024 list. Again, this list obviously isn't exhaustive. I could be surprised by an amazing game that I didn't even mention here, or I could be surprised by an amazing game that's still not even announced. The world of video games is deep and wide, and I'm always open to a sleeper hit knocking my socks off. 2023 was an overwhelming year, in both good and bad ways, but hopefully we see more of the good again in 2024. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.